Hello everyone, my name is Leo Lee. I'm sharing this tutorial of using KitBash workflow using the assets called the Secrets of Luminara from KitBash3D, which is free assets available on Cargo KitBash3D for everyone to download it and to create amazing environmental design with it. Blender has become one of the most popular 3D tools, especially for concept artists and entertainment industry. I'll be showing my entire working process from scratch to finish within Blender, covering the basic UI of Blender, design basics, lighting and textures, and the final paint over within Photoshop. And to see the whole assets, it has been grouped by divided different parts of the building, from larger buildings, platforms, ground floor, and bridges. For example, also it gave a couple really good examples of how these kits can be worked together to construct larger buildings or location design. From those, I can already imagine so many possibilities in my head of seeing maybe a legacy location with large tower buildings at the entrance with intensive detailed side buildings around it. Or you can even focus on the dark theme interior concept art because it's provided some small props like the tombs and spiky floors and some crate and other very interesting, very little pieces for interior design specifically. Also, it provided some case like the Jeep camp, which is very detailed as well, and hot air balloon shape. I can see this flying in the scene, which will be awesome. So see what I can to bring to life. See you in next session. Hey guys, welcome to watch my tutorial of using the kit from KitBash3D called the Secret of Luminara. It's a really good asset, like you can directly grab on Cargo, the app from the KitBash3D, and using that directly into Blender, and you can create something like a legacy fantasy world with kind of very detailing environmental design only with a kit. And you can get this kit free, and I'll show later how I download it and import it into Blender later. So at this stage, I'm doing a very basic 3D blockout. As you seen like in the work of the Real Studio, so concept artists usually got like this kind of gray box from level artists for you to better understanding what the scale. And here I place a very tiny cylinder shape for me to use this to replace the human being size. So for me, it's very easy to understand where the inches is and how tall is a wall and what's a scale realistic for human beings to standing in front of interest to looking at this like a gigantic space. So this is like a very important step for me to using very basic modeling technique in Blender to create this kind of simple world, and really looking like low poly, that kind of version, but it's gonna help me significantly in the future to replace this kind of each structures or each location with the KitBash. So instead of like creating KitBash from the very beginning, I 100% recommend it, especially for the new beginners, use a 3D like Blender to create a scene. It's better to start it with a very basic 3D blockout like this. And also I can do another thing that's to understanding the spatial of here and how far away from the entrance to the player, and what the camera view you can placing, and what's the geometry for adding more detailing based on. So that is all the part I'm thinking at this stage. I hope you can really enjoy of creating this space, or I would say designing the space by the low poly part instead of using crazy detailing. And this is gonna become the very important foundation for you to bring any kits in the future. After I placing all the big geometry like the main buildings, And here I am like placing some very tiny stairs or road for you to understanding how to go from the ground floor to the upper floors. Okay, so this part is very, very easy. So welcome to watch my next section using the kits from The Secret of Luminara. And welcome to the juicy part of the creation using The Secret of Luminara, which is Kitbashing part. And what I usually do is I open up 2 blenders, and one blender I can open all the Kitbash I want to be using, and I can pick any kits I need at this stage, which means only the main buildings or the larger structure props I only use. So I can copy from one blender at the source blender and into the workspace blender where I'm building my environmental design. So I think this is a benefit. You can, if you have like 2 screens, you can watch at the other screen of the source blender what kind of kit you want at this stage. You can simply copy by pressing Ctrl+C and then switch to another blender, Ctrl+V, to paste whatever you want from the whole kit. So it will cause a little like laggy sometimes if you open 2 blender, but if you control really well, I think that will be not that big problem. And at this stage, you can see some case I'm working with. I'm using some modifier to adjust the kits to be my needs at this stage. The most common modifiers I'm using is the mirror modifier, which enables you to just work on just one side if you work on the mirror scene. So I really recommend it to use a mirror modifier. And if you like using, for example, some add-ons like Machine 3 tools or hard ops, so they have give you like the quick shortcuts to mirror one object based on the other. So also you can like directly drag from the modifier panels to apply the modifier into the object you want to use. So it's a different is like you can press shortcuts within the add-ons. Another modifiers I'm using a lot, as you've seen before, is called array modifier. Array modifier, you can pick just like one piece, for example, the wall or the floor panel. So you pick just one and then you apply the array modifier. It's going to enable it to duplicate into like a line shape, or you can have the multiple modifiers applied with the same object as well. So the array modifier applied with mirror modifier, so you can just work on say 50%, and then after that you're gonna have the other 50% on the other side. So they gotta save you a lot of times on it. But the only thing is once you do array, you're probably gonna bump out those ramps you're gonna use. You're gonna cause the lagging a little bit. So at stage, I really recommend you to simplify the model a little bit more. For example, like this, you can into the animal, like to remove or delete some part, like maybe overlaps, so you can save some mesh or like triangles when you're working 3D. Otherwise, it's gonna become like a super laggy when you use too much modifiers to give you a lot of triangles in the scene. So this is gonna be 100% recommended to watch over the ramps and how much ramps you're gonna use for this one. And the other modifiers I'm gonna use in it, decimate modifier. I'm probably gonna use that later after I finish the scene. So the decimate modifier, as I mentioned, to control how much triangles and how much the faces or vertex in the scene is like you can use in the decimate modifier to simplify your geometry, but don't go that far. Otherwise, you're gonna lose a lot of details. But for now, the 2 modifiers is gonna be enough for me to create a scene or build up the scene to work with. So one is array, another one is like mirror modifier, as you see, which is called like hops mirror modifier, which is like from the hard ops. They changed the name a little bit. So but it's work at the same way. For the array modifiers, you can have, for example, multiple modifiers work together. So they're gonna give you like, for example, if you use only just one array modifier, so the design gonna be looking like a little bit average. But if you have like, say, have a 2 kits for example, like one section or one module, so you can use another array to array this module. So they're gonna give you a little bit more variations to work with. Otherwise, the design gonna looks like too simple or average. So this is why you see some parts, especially for the small parts, small props, I'm bashed in. So I usually use like a multiple array modifiers to work together to create something interesting shapes. And at this stage, I'm only focused on the larger structures. For example, around the central area, so you see them 2 tall tower shaped buildings, which is like you can have the silhouette wise, it's very standing out that much. So you can from the far distance, you can recognize where is the entrance, and to the I would say the circular or surrounding buildings around this, I give a little more smaller shapes. So which is called like a very basic design of the tip of the design, which is play with a contrast in between the big, medium, and small. So this is like a very, very simple and very useful design tips to create something very interesting, like to play with the scales. Okay, and some assets, I do a very simple adjustment, I would say. Instead of like a modeling something new, I can take only the partial of the building or of the kits and do a little bit more, like say 25 or 30% modification based on their kits, so that I can create a little bit more interesting variations. They already provide like a very interesting variations in terms of like a large or medium and detailing small ships. But sometimes as you work with this scene, you can pick like a one comprehensive kits, and you're gonna, for example, already loaded like 5 to 10 different elements. You can pick just one from one building or from one kit, and this already become the source for you to doing this kind of concepting with, especially the Kitbashing workflow. And I would say the Kitbashing is not means you can only use what they have. You can definitely modify the shape into what you want. At this stage, I would be careful the instead of like say I want to play with big, medium, small, so I can rescaling the kit that much. That's gonna cause the later texture problem when you open the texture later. So you're gonna looking at the scales of texture. If you scaled up or down the object too much, so you can see the texture or the UV looks like so different from each other. So they're gonna cause the scaling problem. So it looks like something like fake or something two elements doesn't fit in each other in terms of scales. So be careful of that. As you see here, so I can modify the kits by using the sliding tool, I would say, in the modeling. So you can change the shapes of themselves into, for example, like the angle, or instead of, or you can change in horizontal way or vertical way to make it a little bit more interesting. I do definitely sometimes with the knees I scale up and down, but I really be careful like don't go too far. Or if you put like something in the very not very recognizable place, I think that will be fine, because from the distance you won't be able to tell the difference of the texture if you make something wrong at the very beginning by the change of scales. But something closer to the camera, I would definitely pay 100% careful about if I do scaling up and down. So at this stage, I basically blocking out the whole center part or the main buildings and side buildings. And right now I'm working on some detailing. So I want to have something popping up from the skyline area. So if you're looking up, you see something interesting lines goes across each other. So they're gonna creating a definitely very interesting focal point. So you can bring your eyes looking up instead of down. Because if you're looking down, after you give the lighting, so they're gonna create a very intact shadow area. So something on the up, and you can create some structure. So you're gonna see through the lighting from it, and you see the silhouettes or the shapes is a little more easier. So this is where in here I put a lot of like very interesting line shape, I would say the paler stuff, and on the top of it, so you can very easily grab your eyes. Like if you see the scene, so you're gonna looking up a little bit more. And in terms of the kind of fantasy world or the legacy ancient places I'm created, I like to create something like more royal feeling, I would say. So it's in terms of composition technique. So I really recommend if you're creating the larger scenes, the upper focal point is definitely always work better than the lower ones. And on top of it, I want to give a little functionality where you can see probably I put something like a bridge or feels like a workable place on there. Feels like it's like players, or it's like somewhere players can get access, but it's just like a little indication of that. It doesn't have to 100% work, right? And right now I'm focused on the rooftop or some space looks like it's super flat. So I give a little structure like hand railing, I would say, or the stairs to make this place a little bit more functionality feeling. Functionality I usually bring within almost finishing the detailing at this stage. At the very beginning, if you do like a large environment, if you just like stuck with all the functionality part, and you're gonna very easy to lose the shape language. So I would say first 2-3 hours focus on the very graphical shapes and how to make this scene looks interesting in terms of like a shape design. And then once you gradually into the detailing, cause the large environment scene, and you after you add in detailing, you gonna feels like it's more related to the human being size area. So where it's really good point for you to starting to think about how the players to interact with the scene. So this is like my habit to work on, I would say, any environment type of design. But I would definitely recommend people to follow this kind of mind flow, and at this stage choose the right choice to make each step clear, and not only focus on or not only like think about everything at this stage. It's gonna be super tired, I would say. So doing concept in 3D, instead of like creating each asset like a modeler or traditional concepting ways to do the creation, the Kitbashing give you a lot of benefit. Like once you're looking at the kits, you already have some ideas, ideations like happen in your mind. This is gonna give you a lot of guidance, or give you some new ideas, like looking at, for example, like this already being as a reference to me. So I would definitely recommend it to working this way and make the creation process a lot of fun rather than boring and hard. And as you see here, I created very simple geometry like a cube to do the Boolean cuts of the some object I'm working with. I want to make this more like a broken or like a legacy area instead of like it feels it's built by yesterday, right? So I want to make it more like a years or the ages. So this is where I put something broken and some broken pillars and some random rocks on the ground. So it feels it's very believable. Like in this stage, it's already many years nobody visited, so it got some very interesting shapes for the damages. This is for storytelling part, but for the design, as I'm using a lot of mirror modifier to mirror the scene from left to right. But if you creating this kind of damage elements, they're gonna give you some opportunity to make the scene looks like a mirror or not mirror looking, right? So they have the contrast between left and right. So which is like something interesting I want to play with instead of like 100% mirrored and perfect looking. So this is not what I want. So after I detailing basically the all building part, I gonna expanding the part into the lower ground, I would say, because it's not very important. After I set up my tone or the scaling or the composition and or I would say combination of each, how I use like each kit and how I combine each kit together, I would say the kit's already looking give you a lot of freedom to connecting each kit from each other, and looks like a very neutral. But at a very early stage, you need to, in terms of like creating this kind of legacy environment, you need to understanding the very basic of the architecture design and or the environment design a little bit more, so you know how this kind of buildings back in, I would say, 1,000 years ago, how people create this, and they're gonna give you a lot of believable method to build up this thing instead of like a pile of stuff together to create something, just complex looking, right? So you want to make it something believable and playable place. This is like another topic I want to bring a little bit more. It's when I create a concept image, I see it's more like a concepting related to any games, right? So you can put in the engine, so you can throw a player in, so you can have the players walk around this space rather than just a beautiful illustration. So this is where I'm looking more like historical, that kind of documentary, to understanding a little bit more about the architecture from each stage, so you can better understanding if you creating the assets from the zero, so you know the logical of the architecture, how people build in this place in life, I would say. So the final part of Kitbashing, instead of like going to final stage, like I would say the last 2 steps is like throwing some very nice tiny detailing like this little shot walls or handwriting, that kind of elements gonna definitely give you a lot of sense where players can get access, and imagine the players can swim in the water and how to get on the floor, right? So you're gonna leave some interest for them to switching this kind of different levels. So they're gonna become very interesting way if you go into gameplay thinking mode, like developing a game. So the very tiny props and give you a lot of help to create that kind of gameplay based layout. So I think in this stage, instead of like being a 100% concept art, you need to understanding a little bit knowledge about the level artist, how level artists creating this big things in the engine. So it's gonna be, to me, very helpful for sure to be an environment concept artist. So lastly, I picked a very tiny props like this, like floating rocks, that kind of prop to make the detailing looks more interesting. So at this stage, I'm 80% done with the scene with Kitbashing, and here I'm grabbing some vegetation like the coconut trees and some of the other trees. I got like 4 or 5 different version trees downloaded from the Kaggle, from the KitBash3D app. So all the assets are already linked with material, so don't worry about texturing the trees. And here I'm placing some like a pine trees, which is looking the very interesting shape compared to the coconut trees. So I want to make the pine tree, and because it's more like a vertical shapes, it's a really great shape language if you want to do the kind of fantasy scene to give you a lot of that kind of royal, that kind of feeling type of trees. And same, I'm using like mirror tools to mirror some trees, but in terms of the coconut trees, called the shape is very unique. I don't want like make the mirror looks like too fake. So this is where I'm manually placing the coconut trees. But for the pine trees, it's because all the shape looks like similar to each other, like a very clean vertical shape. So I can use a mirror modifier. And in terms of the other trees, like some generic trees, so I can place the trees as a collection, and I could create a collection instance. So where each collection instance contains like 4 trees at a pack, so you can copy paste the collection instance, so you can manually put the trees somewhere you want. And the one technique I showed before is I can use the randomized transform, so you can give a little bit randomization of the placing or the scale of the collection instance you place in the scene. The all stuff I do is like I try to avoiding the average design if I place it on KitBash. And here I'm starting to placing some grass, and the technique I'm using for the grass, same, I'm downloaded from the Kaggle app. And you can put the 3, for example, different grass into one collection, and the same, you can creating just one plane as I did here, and with particle system. So the way I'm using particle system, instead of just selecting each object you want a particle or scattering the grass on, what I do is like I create a new plane, and I can manually control where exactly the grass is gonna grow. And for particle system, it's very easy to use. Just choose the air, and then in terms of like a scaling and the rotation, all the parameters you can play with. Is only for, I think it's a little bit difficult for new beginners to use particle system, and it's very the RAM cost, a very heavy, expensive object if you bring too much the kind of vegetation or grass in your scene. But if you have like a strong PC, you can definitely do something like a little bit more variations on the ground with different grass. Okay, if some concept artists may know, the particle system work really well with a weight paint. The weight paint is like you can control the different weight on each vertex, so you can control where the grass to grow. So this is another technique I didn't show off down here. So my habits of using particle system is like to create just one plane and to placing the plane or copy paste the plane into where I want the grass to grow. So I think that is easier way for me to control exactly, or easier for me to visually see where the grass is, compared to the weight paint. I have to turn on the weight paint menu to check. I think that is more complex. And the last step is like I'll find some like a very, very tiny rocks on the ground. Feels it's more like a broken place or laxy place. So they give you a lot of like kind of greeny taste of where the place have been left for too long, right? So it gives you a lot of like a realism, that kind of looking to the scene. Same like for this kind of very tiny rocks, already do a lot of decimation to it. So instead of like each rock have too expensive for you to do, so I do a lot of, in terms of the trees, I do this kind of decimation as well. Because it's very tiny, for example, like each leaves, you won't be able to recognize that much. So I think it is very easy to work with like a low, I would say like a very optimized mesh. And after you placing all the vegetation and the grass and the tiny rocks on ground, the next step to do is to creating a terrain on the back. So what I do is like I just downloaded some rocks kits from Bridge, which is like a free tools. You can download all the assets, especially for the nature assets, different rocks and terrains and different kinds of like materials as well, and other some looking generic kits you can definitely find from there. From here, I think this is like same as I mentioned before as a level artist way to build up the terrains or the nature elements using different type of different looking of the terrains instead of like just you placing just one big 3D scanned mountain, right? So here you can definitely go detailing and customize what kind of like looking for the skyline you want. And here I have basically 2-3 different parts of the rock. One is like a large rock I can use as a base, and then another medium shape I can put the medium shape on top of the base as a hat to create a little bit more customized. And another one is like a tiny sharp shape edge, the mountain, so I can placing on some area I want to push my focal point looking at. And the one last step, and placing some trees around the mountains that looks more interesting looking. And after I done the Kitbashing, I go into to work with the water texture. Same, I downloaded the material from the Cargo app from KitBash3D. I can go into the node panels. I think this is a little complex to the new beginners, but if you know somehow I'm creating here, it's like I'm using IBL occlusion node to creating the mask areas where the IBL occlusion is like you can generate the mask between the two objects when they touch. So here I place a one plane to overlap with the ground. So where the edge, the ground that touch the plane, they're gonna creating the mask from the ambient occlusion node, and I can using the Musgrave texture node to mix with ambient occlusion node to create a little more interesting variation shapes around the edge, so I can separate the edge from closer to the ground and to the center of the water. For this session, I'm trying to change the weather of the scene. So I take a lot of time to build up the scene. So I really want to push this scene into something looking different from the very generic daylighting, sunshine, direct lighting, that kind of scene. For this one, I'm wanna creating more like ambient light and a snow winter version of the scene. So basically, I then adding another layers of the snow to each part of this Kitbash I'm working with. So the way I'm creating snow is I creating a box and do a little bit more subdivision to the box. So this is where you can go into the sculpture mode to using the sculpture brush. I would say for this stage, what you want to do is like just blending well the snow or the white material. I would say I haven't applied the snow material on it, so it looks like snow at white. So you're just finding the very interesting way to blending this. For example, right now I'm only working on the ground part, and I leave where the players can walk, show the ground texture, and the rest of it is more like snow. So I think this is the most common way in the video game design. You need to have some texture difference on the ground or on the floor to indicate where the players go, or to create a guidance to how the players you want them to explore the world. So once you're creating just one subdivided version of the snow cube, I would say, what I do is like I always Alt D to duplicate. Otherwise, you're gonna creating too much useless that kind of geometry. If you Alt D, you can definitely save a lot RAMs on it. And the way you subdivide it, if you give too much subdivision, it got too expensive for the mesh. I think it's easier to have that kind of proper amount to subdivide it, so that you can use the sculpture brush. At least you won't looking like a two angular shapes when you like do the I would say the massage part of the cube. So if only it looks like okay for that, I think that it's like the perfect balance, right? So of course you want to achieve that kind of very realistic snow looking, that kind of materials, or you can definitely like download a lot of like a mountain, like the terrain I downloaded from Quicksell Bridge. I didn't just rely on too much on the mesh for the snow. I think this is like definitely easier for me to control where snow is, and easier for me to use like sculpture brush to control the material difference. And the other way I'm using, feels like I can just placing the snow material on top of each very tiny props, like for example, like here, the very short walls. The way I'm doing this is I go into the animal of each object, and then I can shift that to selecting the normal. The normal is where you can control what kind of or where you want the snow is. If I selecting just one face facing up, and then select Shift S, so you can help me to select the similar angle of the normal face out of this. Because imagine the snow only falling down on the top, or the face is like facing up, right? So this is where you can very easy to control, or they're gonna automatically control where the snow is. It's like always on the top of the face. So what I usually do is like I selecting some like larger part of the top face, and I can go into Shift S and control selecting the similar angle or the normal of the face. And then if you press L, so you can selecting all the connected materials, so you can apply the one material to this. So this is like a most handy way and fun, like when I created a snow scene like this. Or you can change the snow into sand, right? So it's same scenario, it's just like different color and materials. So for example, some areas where players cannot be get access, I can imagine they're already a little bit thicker snows down there because nobody touch it. And on some area, like say stairs and on the floor, I didn't give that much thickness of the snow. I feels like it's players or the human beings can get access to it, can remove it by walk on it. So there's a little difference. I can make the variations into the snow on the building and the snow on the floor. And another technique, if you like selecting multiple faces, they're just similar normal. Another technique is like if you switch to selecting vertex and right click, so you can have the option of the smooth vertex. So they're gonna smooth out the edge of the vertex you selected, so you make the area selecting more like a soft form, like kind of shape. So I think it's more like a snow looking. Of course, you can definitely achieve this by applying subdivision modifier, but it's gonna be so expensive for you to generate this by too much faces. I think this way is you gonna save you a lot of time and the RAMs instead of generating too many verticals. You're just using smooth vertex function to creating a little bit more smooth edge out of the snow looking objects. Once I apply the one side, I just selecting out the snow material I want to mirror to and copy paste to the other side. Because most kits I'm Kitbashing for this one is already linked. This is like, instead of you doing the Shift D to duplicate, the best I can try is like do the Alt D. So Alt D is like you creating objects being linked to each other. I already explained in the first session. So once you apply the snow on one prop, it's gonna definitely change the other linked object. So this is very, very handy for you to use an Alt D sometimes instead of Shift D. So as you see here, is like I basically add all the snow layers to all the architecture, the building part, and the next part is I can add some snow on top of the mountains and trees. I only work on some trees, like the pan trees, which is closer to the camera. So I didn't add all the snow to all trees. I think it's too expensive. So I only do this to something too closer to camera. And for the mountain, definitely once you're adding the snow layers, to give you a very interesting looking of the values in between the mountain texture and the snow texture. The patterns down there is definitely more interesting to looking at. And the other one is like, imagine the winter, the water become the ice. So this is where I can apply the ice material to replace the previous water material. What I do is like I still rely on the ambient occlusion node, and I can mix in two materials together. So as you see here, is like I can have the black white to be as a mask to separate where the snow is and where the water is, so you can see slightly the patterns on the lake. So it's gonna generate a very interesting like snow ice lake, that kind of vibe. And for snow winter version, I remove the sunlight, or I change the sunlight to really subtle numbers, so you won't see directly lighting from the top. It's more like ambient light right now. So another difference compared to the daytime lighting version is the fog. So in the winter version, the fog is usually turns like really thick. So this is where I change the volumetric node to push a little bit more distance, or the more volumetric, to feel more like the snow scene as you see in the real life. And the final next one is like to adding little snow in the foreground. The vehicle on top of it looks a little more neutral, and also the snow on top the hot bloom shape. The same I do on the buildings. Here's like also using the selecting similar of the normal face, so I can select all the top faces to add the snow layers on top of it. And after you set up all these kind of winter elements, the final thing I usually do is go into the compositing node to play around with the colors, and volumetric colors work as well. So this is how I finalizing another scene of the snow. I have like 4 different versions of the angle as I did similar to the daytime version. So you can see my final image. Welcome to the final session of this tutorial. It's to bring in the render into Photoshop for finalizing. The way I'm bringing the scene is I can render out the scene without the background. It feels like it's easier sometimes to do the background, give the more high-rise looking sky textures within Photoshop. So you can render out the other layers of the scene called a color ID by using the workbench render engine. So you can select in a random and a flag, so you can render out the scene with different colors for you to easier to selecting where you want to replacing. So as you see here, so I added the another image of the sky to replace the original sky, which is a kind of like a low res looking. And another layers I want to photobash, it's the little fires on the storm. They're gonna match definitely the color of the lighting I'm matching the scene. So here is another layers I want to add in Photoshop. I always do is like to add in the fog. The way I'm using fog to separate layers, for example, right now I quick selecting the layers of the tree. I want to separate the trees a little bit clear from the foreground and background. So where you feels like it's the distance looking like too connected to each other too close, so it's really hard to recognize the distance. So this is the where you can add the fog to push the distance for that. And also for the clouds, I can add in a little bit more clouds to help for the composition as well. And a little bird brush, so give a little blurry effects into it, so it looks more natural looking. And this is like the very interesting function I found in Photoshop called a camera raw function in here. So once you merge all layers into one, so you can basically control all the detailing or the coloring functions, and which is just like a one panel. So this is like super handy to final twisting the looking of the images. So here comes to the end of the tutorial. I'm super excited to see your version of the Sacred Luminara. Thanks for watching. See you there.